I just wanted to let you guys know I'm adding an additional office hours. So that I get a few emails that folks couldn't make my office hours on Fridays, and obviously I can't accommodate everybody's schedule, but I'm going to add a second office hours 3 to 4 on Tuesdays, starting next week. And then just a reminder that Pete and Clark both have office hours on Tuesday and Thursday, and then we'll be starting having review sessions starting tomorrow. So Pete will have a review session tomorrow in 114, just across the hall here, from 6 to 7, and then Clark will have a review session in this room in the 101 on Friday.
6 to 7. 6 to 7.
Yes. Yeah, so in both review sessions, Pete and Clark will be going over the most recent material, and so for these review
Have I gone to
sessions,
that?
we'll cover kind of what they
I think
are
Thursday.
concepts from lectures 1 through 3. And they'll be available for questions as well. So they'll both highlight concepts as well as answer questions. You're doing one for you. Okay, so Clark was saying that for the next few weeks, his review session is actually going to be in 114 due to booking this room. But we'll send out a message via e-courses to clarify that. Okay, so both of the review sessions this week will be in 114. So I think this is pretty good. We offer a lot of different office hours or review sessions, so everybody should be doing really well in this class. So lots of time to talk to us. Okay, so before we get into today's lecture, let's start off with a little bit of review. And so we'll try this out again. This is what we used on Monday, the poll everywhere. So you can go to pollev.com/NST103, or you can text NST103 to this number 37607 to join. If you don't have a phone or computer, that's okay. Just go ahead and try and answer on your own. Okay, so we'll do a few review questions. So pancreatic acinar cells secrete digestive enzymes, insulin, glucagon, or bile salts. Okay, so we're split. So this is 50-50. Okay, we got it corrected. There was a self-correction there really quickly. Okay, so this is good. So 85% is in digestive enzymes. So this is correct. So the pancreatic acinar cells, so we just recall the pancreas, so it abuts the small intestine and duodenum, and it has both exocrine and endocrine activities. In terms of the endocrine activities, we have the beta cells and the alpha cells secreting glucagon and insulin into the vein, right? So it's regulating glucose metabolism through blood circulation in the body. And then we have the exocrine activities, which is what we're concerned with in digestion, which are the cells, these acini or acinar cells, which secrete digestive enzymes into the pancreatic duct. Another one, the majority of water is absorbed in the oral cavity, the stomach, the small intestine, or the large intestine. Quick one. So we have two prominent answers here, small intestine and large intestine. So both mediate water absorption, but the majority is going to be taking place in the small intestine. So if you remember from this slide, taking about 18 liters of water, your gastrointestinal tract, both from 3 liters coming from intake, just drinking water or other liquids, 15 liters from secretions from our various organs, and then the small intestines is the brunt of the absorption. It's mediating absorption of 15 liters of water. The large intestine also plays important roles in water absorption, but it's mediating about 2.8 liters of water absorption. So in terms of the majority of water absorption is happening in the small intestine. Two more. So which is not a feature of facilitated diffusion? Different answers. So it does not transport cargo or molecules up its concentration gradient. So it's diffusion. So it mediates trafficking down its concentration gradient, right? It can be saturable, protein based, and it uses a protein transport. The chloride bicarbonate exchanger in parietal cells mediates what type of transport? Passive diffusion, paracellular, endocytic, primary active, or secondary active. Good. Secondary active is the most popular and correct answer. So the chloride bicarbonate exchanger is mediating secondary active. So if we come back to this, we've seen this several times. We have examples of primary active. So it's mediating the transport of material against its concentration gradient, and it's directly using ATP, right? So that's primary active. And then our bicarbonate chloride exchanger here, chloride is going up its concentration gradient, which is immediately a hint that this is going to be active. And there's no ATP hydrolysis. This is going to be secondary active because bicarbonate is pulling down its concentration gradient. So the energy utilized here is because bicarbonate is flowing down its concentration gradient. So primary, the energy is coming from direct ATP hydrolysis, whereas in secondary, the energy is coming from molecule flowing down its concentration gradient. So anytime you have something flowing up its concentration gradient, it's active, and then you can split that into two. Is it hydrolyzing ATP directly? That's primary. If it's not, then it's most likely secondary, right? Or it is secondary. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to today's lecture on carbohydrates. So lecture 3 and 4 are both going to be covering carbohydrate digestion and absorption, and today we'll mostly focus on digestion. So we're going to start off with a little bit about carbohydrate nomenclature and chemistry. We'll discuss carbohydrates in our diet, providing an overview of the different types of carbohydrates in our diet and some of the effects of deficiency in carbohydrates or excess carbohydrates. And then we'll focus in on the mechanisms in biochemistry of carbohydrate digestion, with a focus on the enzymes that are important in this process. So review, you can refer to the Stepanek textbook, chapters 4 and 8. Any sort of biochemistry or organic chemistry textbook will have a pretty good review on carbohydrate nomenclature and chemistry. And this isn't something we're going to spend a lot of time like testing here on complex sugar chemistry, but it's useful to have a basic understanding of how sugars look, where the different carbons are, what the different bonds are formed. And we need to have this understanding so that we can begin to think about how those carbohydrates and how those sugars are broken down for absorption. So it's good to have a basic understanding of that, but it's not the main focus of the class. So I'll review a few of these concepts in the next few slides, but if this seems like really unfamiliar, you might want to just review in your biochemistry textbook. Okay, and so here are two examples of monosaccharides. So these are simple sugars, and this is one way of representing a sugar. This is referred to as the Fischer projection, and we can largely group these into aldoses and hexoses. And so an aldose has an aldehyde, so the carbonyl is up here at the end, so we refer to this as an aldose, whereas a ketose is a ketone group, so the carbonyl is at any position except that. And we have, each of these has 6 carbons, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we refer to this as an aldohexose, because it's an aldehyde, 6 carbons. And this one on the right is a ketohexose. It has 6 carbons, but the carbonyl is present here in the middle. So this is glucose on the left and fructose on the right. And you'll see another nomenclature here, D-glucose and D-fructose. So this refers to the stereochemistry, so you can have D or L sugars. In nature and in our bodies, it's pretty much always D. So we're going to pretty much restrict our conversations to D sugars. But the D nomenclature comes from the chirality of this final chiral carbon. in this set. So we have a few different chiral carbons present in glucose. And here, if the hydroxyl group is drawn to the right, D, glucose is drawn to the left, it's an L. Okay, so the mirror image or reflection. So glucose is a specific aldohexose. So aldohexose is a broader term, so something like galactose is also going to be an aldohexose, so we'll have an aldehyde, and we'll have 6 carbons, but it'll have a different arrangement of the hydroxyl groups. So aldohexose is a broader term for the sugars.
So the third carbon is an example of
Good.
the third carbon down.
So the L and the D refer to the whole sugar, and we're just, the nomenclature is based on the final chiral carbon. So it's all based on smaller 3-carbon sugars plus formaldehyde, and that's where it comes from. So if you just have a 3-carbon sugar, it would be the sole chiral carbon, and then any sugars that are built off of that will always be based on that sort of 3-carbon sugar. And for our purposes, we'll always be discussing D sugars. Okay, so this way of representing a sugar is referred to as the Fisher projection. This was coined by this guy, Herman Emil Fisher, who's a famous chemist. And so not only did he have these really cool steampunk spectacles and this awesome like, San Francisco hipster gear, but he contributed a lot to our understanding of the chemistry of purines and sugars. And so he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1902. And he's also attributed with this fantastic quote, so clearly he has a lot to teach us, not only about sugar chemistry, but about life in general. So coming back to sugar chemistry, so this is referred to as a Fisher projection in honor of Emil Fisher. But actually in aqueous environments, sugars very rarely exist in this linear conformation. It's a useful way to present the sugars, but this actually, they don't really exist in this conformation very much. So in an aqueous environment, maybe about 3% or 4% of sugars are going to exist in this linear conformation. The majority are in this cyclic conformation. This is referred to as Haworth projection. Okay, and this is because of the tendency of hydroxyls to form bonds with carbonyl carbons. And these are referred to as hemiacetals or hemiketols. In this case, a cyclic form. And so in this case, we have an intramolecular reaction in which the hydroxyl group on our final chiral carbon, carbon number 5, is forming a bond with our carbonyl carbon. Okay, and so we can see that here on the right. Start with the carbon. Here's the oxygen that's coming from that hydroxyl. And it formed a bond with carbon 1, which was previously that carbonyl carbon. And this is referred to as the anomeric carbon. Okay, the carbon that was previously present in the carbonyl. Okay, and there's an additional nomenclature here of beta, and that just refers to this new hydroxyl group. Whether it's up, it'll be beta, and if it's down, it'll be alpha. Okay? That's on this anomeric carbon. So previously, this anomeric carbon didn't have a hydroxyl group. Now, when we form the cyclic form, it does, and that alpha or beta just indicates whether it's up or down. So beta is up, alpha would be down. Okay, so here are a few examples of some common simple sugars that we'll see in our diet. So when people say simple sugars, we're just referring to monosaccharides or single sugars. Right? So we have our favorite here that we've been talking about, glucose, we have fructose, and then galactose. So this would also be that aldohexose. This with a different kind of conformation of its hydroxyl groups, different orientation of these hydroxyl groups relative to glucose. Okay. We have some common disaccharides shown here. So this would include things like sucrose and also lactose, found in milk and dairy products. And what we can see here is that sucrose is a disaccharide, so we have 2 sugars that are joined by a covalent linkage, and we're joining glucose to fructose. Okay? And this is joined via the 1 carbon of glucose to the 2nd carbon of fructose. We call this the alpha 1,2 linkage. And these bonds between these disaccharides are referred to as glycosidic bonds. So lactose also has a glycosidic bond joining galactose and glucose, and this is a beta 1,4 linkage. So it's taking the 1 carbon of lactose, an anomeric carbon, and linking it to the 4th carbon in glucose. It's a beta 1,4 glycosidic linkage. So if we were describing lactose, we would just say it has lactose and glucose linked by a beta 1,4. Okay, and finally we have polysaccharides. And shown here is just a representation of glycogen, which is one of the main ways our body stores glucose. And so this has both linear segments of glucose in which there's going alpha 1,4 linkages, and then it has these branch points. And so glycogen can form these very dense storage granules for glucose in our body, mainly in our liver. And so we have 1,4 linked glucose, and then these branch points, 2 and 1,6 linked. We'll come back to that. Okay, so here's just a chart showing some common sugars, some of them we discussed in the last slide. Our monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose. Our disaccharides, we talked about sucrose and lactose. Maltose is actually a disaccharide of glucose, so it's glucose linked to glucose through a 1,4 linkage. This doesn't occur a ton in the diet, but it's a very common breakdown product. So when you're breaking down glycogen or other glucose polymers, you'll get a lot of maltose in the GI tract that you'll have to digest further for absorption. And then on the right, we see some common polysaccharides. Okay, so we have amylose, it's a linear glucose molecule, 1,4 linked. Amylopectin, very similar to glycogen, has those branch points. And then cellulose is a plant polysaccharide that we're unable to digest. So it has a glycosidic linkage. It's beta 1,4 that our bodies don't have enzymes to digest that particular linkage. Okay, so one kind of interesting aspect of sugar chemistry that's important for nutrition is this reaction called the Maillard reaction. And this gives rise to a lot of flavors, a lot of smells and aromas and tastes, right? And so this is a very important reaction in terms of nutrition and cooking. And specifically, this Maillard reaction describes the reaction of a protein with a sugar. And so in the Maillard reaction, upon heating and upon cooking, you're going to get a reaction or a bonding between a sugar, and in this case we have glucose shown here in the Fischer projection, and the amine group of protein. Okay? And usually this is going to be in a lysine or arginine residue, has these amino groups in their R group, right? And these groups, upon heating, this stimulates the reaction, and we get these unstable shift base, in which the protein is linked now covalently to our sugar. This shift base is an unstable intermediate, and this will relax. There's going to be some rearrangements at the carbon 1 and carbon 2, forming what's called a ketoamine. So it has this now a ketone, so we have the carbon present here. And then it's linked to the protein. So this is an irreversible, non-enzymatic reaction. Okay? And we refer to this as glycation. Okay, so non-enzymatic bonding of a sugar to a protein. And this ketoamine can then undergo a number of complex reactions forming other molecules which actually give rise to different tastes, different aromas that we associate with food. So including different colors like the browning that you get when you cook a steak or when you bake bread. Okay, those would all be examples of the Maillard reaction in action. And so in terms of thinking about this, cooking food can have some beneficial effects. Of course, one of the beneficial effects is it increases the overall palatability of food. When you're cooking a steak, you smell it, you want to eat it, you taste it. This is a good thing. But it also has a beneficial effect because we kill bacteria. And so that's probably a more tangible beneficial effect. When you heat food, it kills bacteria. The unfortunate part is that when you heat food and you form these products, your body's no longer able to digest and utilize these products. These are irreversible reactions, and so it can have effects in terms of the nutrient availability of some of those amino acids and sugars. And the other kind of more controversial aspect with regards to this process is it's thought that some of the products might be harmful. So say like, oh, if you're cooking and you have this charred meat, some of the products in that charred meat might have harmful effects. And I think that's a little bit more controversial whether that's actually harmful. Yes, so this is essentially irreversible. So technically this can go kind of both ways, but usually when this happens, it's irreversible. You never uncook your steak.
Is that reducing sugar in the meat, or does that come from an outside source?
It can come from anywhere. So there could be some amounts of sugars in the meat, or just from like sauces or things like that. So you definitely have like a mixture in the meat of different components. Right? There's a lot of protein, but there are also going to be sugars present there as well. Okay, so this idea about glycation, so just working out here, glycation is a covalent bonding of a protein to sugar molecules is non-enzymatic. And this doesn't just happen in cooking, it can also happen in your body. So when you cook and you heat the food, this increases the rate of the reaction, but this also happens in the body. And so I want to stress that this is non-enzymatic. So we have other forms of addition of glycans to proteins in our body that are regulated and are enzyme mediated. So for example, we talked about the glycocalyx on the surface of our enterocytes, right? And those are glycoproteins, so those are proteins in which glycans have been added. And those aren't mediated through glycation. In that process, we call it glycosylation. Right? So those proteins are transiting the endoplasmic reticulum, they're being glycosylated in a very specific manner by enzymes in a regulated fashion onto residues, and that's what we refer to as glycosylation. So I just want to distinguish that from glycation, which is a non-enzymatic modification. So glycation can occur in the body as well, and one well-documented case is in the glycation of hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, of course, is a very abundant protein in the blood. And this can happen all the time, but it's especially prevalent in diabetic patients in which they have increased amounts of circulating blood glucose, right? So you have high amounts of glucose in their blood, and you can get the formation of a Schiff base and then an amyloid product, in which you have the glycated hemoglobin, and this is indicative of high concentrations of glucose in the blood. Okay, and in the clinic, this is actually used as a way to monitor how well patients are controlling their blood glucose. So on a very acute level, you could take a blood sample and monitor glucose, but that's just giving you sort of a snapshot, a very acute measurement of glucose at that specific moment. Okay, but this is giving you a composite of blood glucose sugar control over the last several months. And this is because blood cells have a very long lifespan, and the proteins within the blood cells have a similarly long lifespan. So this hemoglobin is around for a long time, so 120 days. And so it has, it kind of gives you a composite of blood sugar control over the last several months. So if you have poor blood sugar control, you have a lot of glucose in the blood, you're going to have increased amounts of this glycated hemoglobin. This will show up in this hemoglobin A1C test. If you've been controlling your blood glucose really well, you'll have lower levels of this glycated hemoglobin. Does that make sense? Okay, so several of these sugars we've talked about, we can very broadly separate the different sugars into digestible and absorbable from non-digestible, non-absorbable sugars. And a lot of times we'll refer to these as fiber, dietary fiber. And this also has very important nutritional consequences, but it's different because we're not digesting and absorbing it. Right? And we'll talk about that in the next lecture in more detail. So in terms of the digestible and the absorbable sugars, we have things like glucose, fructose, and sucrose. So sucrose is a disaccharide, right? These two sugars. And these are going to be found naturally in fruits, also in sweetened beverages, fruit juices, and desserts. Okay? So this is kind of classically what we think of as sweet sugar, right? Table sugar with sucrose. We also have lactose. This is going to be found in milk and dairy products. And then the majority of our carbohydrates in our diet is obtained from starches. This is going to be found in grains like pasta, bread, rice, and corn. Okay? So this is where the majority of our carbohydrates is coming from. Okay, so of course, digestible and absorbable carbohydrates serve many important functions. They provide about half our energy in most diets. So about 250 grams, about 1,000 kilocalories on average, about half of our energy for the day comes from carbohydrates. But that differs depending on people's diets. In the body, it's going to serve a lot of important functions. Of course, glucose is an essential energy source. We can break glucose down through glycolysis and Krebs cycle. This is the primary sort of source of energy for our body cells. It also serves other functions in the body beyond just being an energy source. So it's a precursor for a lot of the other carbohydrates in the body. You can use it to make lactose. You can use it to make ribose and nucleotides. It also can be present in sugars in all of our glycoproteins. Those are the proteins that are going to be enzymatically glycosylated in a regulated fashion, right? We can obtain glucose from our diet, or we can obtain it indirectly from stores within our body, glycogen stores, mostly in the liver, or synthesized from gluconeogenic precursors, for example, amino acids. We're mainly focusing on the how we're obtaining these from the diet, but there are other pools in our body to obtain glucose from when we're not obtaining these from our diet, right? So we're not always eating. So it's good that we can store glucose and utilize it in between meals. Okay, and so having a sufficient amount of carbohydrate intake is important. It can prevent ketosis and eventually prevent protein breakdown. So if you have a lack of carbohydrates, you can start breaking down fats in the body, and this is referred to as ketosis. You're going to be releasing ketone bodies, which are a metabolite of those fatty acids. That's why it's referred to as ketosis. In the extreme cases, this can be okay, and there are a lot of dietary regimes that kind of preach towards a low-carb-based diet, and there are kind of controversial results on this, but there are positive studies on this. But it can be, if you take this to the extreme, you can get ketoacidosis, which having too many ketones in the blood can change the pH of the blood, and that can be very harmful. And on the extreme, you can start to break down the protein, right, like starvation conditions. So in terms of excess intake of carbohydrates, which is probably much more prevalent than the reverse, you can have tooth decay and cavities. And this isn't directly caused necessarily by the carbohydrate or sugar itself. It's actually caused by bacteria in your oral cavity breaking down the sugars and carbohydrates and releasing lactic acid, which will leach minerals from your enamel. And that's why you end up with tooth decay and cavities when you're eating a lot of candy. We need overall poor diet quality, which can increase your predisposition to diseases like obesity or diabetes. And it can also result in a constellation of effects characterized by altered plasma levels of triglycerides, so fat, and lipoproteins that overall increase susceptibility to the development of atherosclerosis or cardiovascular diseases. Right? So having a lot of carbohydrates in your diet or an excess of carbohydrates can give rise to obesity, which predisposes you to diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Okay, so there's been a pretty alarming shift towards a positive energy balance over the past several decades. And when I say a positive energy balance, I just mean in terms of a decrease in physical activity and an increase in the intake of calories. So we're not balancing out our intake of calories with increased physical activity. Okay? And so this is referred to as a positive energy balance. It's too many calories, not enough physical activity. Right? And specifically, there's been an increase over the last several decades of about 300 kilocalories per day. And most of this is coming from carbohydrates. So our intake of carbohydrates has changed a lot So about 50% from grains, polysaccharides, 25% from added sugars, 25% from added fats. This is probably the increase in carbohydrates in our diet is probably a main contributor to this positive energy balance. Okay, and this is kind of further depicted here with in terms of carbonated soft drinks, which have increased over the last many decades. You can see this huge increase, and it's actually crazy when you look at how much sugar these things have. I think like a 20-ounce bottle of Coke, you would have to take like 20 packets of sugar from Keats and like dump it in there. You can imagine if you had like a cup of coffee and you were taking like 20 or 30 packets of sugar every time you drink a cup of coffee. That's kind of what it's like drinking soda, which is kind of crazy. Every time I present this, then I never want to drink soda again. So it's pretty crazy how much sugar is actually in soft drinks. And so this is one sort of example of sort of a changing dietary pattern that's been kind of a concern and maybe a contributor to this positive energy balance. Okay, and this is depicted here in these graphs, it's what you call pictograms from the CDC, in which they've shaded in different colors here the percentage of people with either obesity in the country or with diabetes. Okay, and you can see this really alarming increase in the percentage of people with obesity, and this is also present in a lot of other countries in the world. So back in 2010, which is quite a few years back now, there's a lot of red, over 25% obese, and it seems to be increasing, continuing to increase, which is really alarming. And there's a strong correlation between this increase in obesity with the increase in diabetes. And so we see back in 2010 over 10% of these folks with diabetes in stark red colored states. And this has continued to increase. And so this is really kind of illustrates this metabolic disease epidemic that's been skyrocketing in our country and other countries as well. Okay, so I mentioned insulin a few times. I just want to depict what insulin is doing in a little more detail here. So following a meal, you'll have glucose present in the blood. And if this is circulating at high levels, this is what happens in diabetic patients. But normally we control the amount of glucose in our blood very well. And we do this by releasing insulin into the bloodstream. So this is released by the endocrine function of the pancreas and released by the beta cells in the pancreas. And so insulin will then exit from the bloodstream and bind to specific receptors on cells and stimulate uptake of glucose into the cell. So it's absorbing glucose from the bloodstream, reducing the concentration in the blood, and then that glucose can be utilized intracellularly as fuel, or it can be perhaps synthesized into glycogen for storage. And this is further illustrated here in this graph. So here we have hours following a meal, and on the y-axis we have blood glucose concentration. And so in the normal individual after a meal, we'll have a slight increase in the concentration of glucose in the blood, but insulin has been released, stimulating receptors. We're getting efficient uptake of glucose into our body cells, and so this is rapidly corrected and returned to baseline. Right? So this is due to the actions of insulin on these receptors in the blood. And this is contrast to a type 2 diabetic patient. So here they start at a much higher baseline blood glucose concentration. So already they're even higher than the highest in that normal individual. And following a meal, the blood glucose concentration is kind of skyrockets, right? And then it takes a much longer time for it to return to this higher baseline. And this is characteristic of a diabetic patient and then a type 2 diabetic patient where they're not responding to insulin or they don't have enough insulin to mediate proper blood glucose control. Okay, so this progression here just illustrates a potential kind of general progression of a person from a normal state to a diabetic state. So shown on the bottom are kind of generally blood glucose concentrations and insulin concentrations. So So in a normal individual, we're going to have normal blood glucose and insulin. Right? We may be verging on obesity, and this may predispose us to diabetes and become hyperinsulinemic. So we have upregulated insulin, but we're still maintaining our glucose concentration, right? So we increase our insulin, but still normal glucose. Here we've moved from hyperinsulinemic to pre-diabetic state. We start to have elevated blood glucose, and we have very highly elevated insulin. And then finally, we've reached a type 2 diabetic stage in which we have very high levels of glucose. We're no longer controlling our glucose levels properly, and we might even result in lower levels of insulin. And eventually, our beta cells start to have dysfunction and may even start to die, which may be responsible for this lower insulin. So initially, the pancreatic beta cells start jacking up their insulin production, start producing a lot of insulin, but our bodies start to become insulin resistant, so we're not responding as well to that insulin. And then eventually, the pancreatic beta cells start to have dysfunction and actually die, so we start to get low insulin levels. Okay, let's try a practice question here. This is a throwback to another slide. So the formation of a covalent linkage between hemoglobin and glucose is an example of glycosylation, glycotransfer, glycoprotein synthesis, or glycation. Excellent. Glycation, this is correct. It says non-enzymatic process. Glycosylation would be an example in which you have an enzymatic transfer of that glycan. That's what happens in our ER. So let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll continue with carbohydrate digestion. So 5 minutes.